Okay, so usually at this stage too, I'm probably about ready to start thinking about, like I said, merging this stuff, organizing things a bit better too. So I do recommend that um, yeah, we'll basically take the one of the first subtools of the body. I'm going to just select maybe the boots here, and if you hit Control F, it'll bring up a little dialog saying, "Hey, do you want to create a folder name?" So I'm going to just say yes, body. And then I'll drag in kind of all the different body parts that are sort of that are going to be part of this. And then we'll move the head stuff up into the head. So it's good to start organizing things by head, by the rest of the body. Yeah, let's put that above the body there. And then, yeah, the scarf I'll leave out for now, or I can create a new folder and I'll just call it accessories. Probably didn't spell it right, but that's okay. I'll hide the scarf. So I'll go back down into this folder here. So one of the reasons I like the folder system is that it will basically allow you to create one subtool merged of all these different layers. So if I click on this and go to merge folder, it'll hide that folder, so it keeps them all independent, and then I've got a merged single version of this, okay? So now maybe if you wanted to, you can create a new topology folder, but in this case, it's totally fine. I may just rename this, I'll call it Dynamesh. Okay, so the idea is that I want to take all these separate layers and create one big solid shell. I did mention the boots too, and I really don't like the boot shape right now. They're very ugly, very rough. It's a very bad sculpt, so I'm going to probably just hide these boots and split them from this particular subtool, and we'll come back around to doing a more clean version of boots. Okay, so I'll go to split hidden. Okay, we're on this one. So yeah, let's hide that. So at this stage, I usually start making copies of things. So I have the kind of non-fused, right? Technically, it's one subtool, but there's a bunch of floating parts, right? So if I Control-Shift-click on the jacket, it hides it, and then you see, some of the floating shells and other bits and pieces that are there in the model. So next up, I'll basically duplicate, and now I will Dynamesh. So I usually I'll usually have two versions. So this first one is sort of my template where it's still separate. The second one, this one that I'm hovering over right now, I'm going to Dynamesh and try to keep it at about the same poly count if possible. Yeah, I'm just going to hit the Dynamesh button and see, and it actually got me pretty much close to that poly count. If it doesn't, if it goes way lower, then you have to up your resolution and try to Dynamesh again. If it's way higher, then you go obviously the opposite direction and try to lower the resolution. But for me, this is actually working quite well. So if I Dynamesh now, it's all fused. One other thing you're going to notice is that if there are any polygroups, they will potentially disappear. And it's a bit of a quirk of ZBrush. So with the paintbrush icon on, it will basically eliminate the polygroups. But if you turn this off, okay, and then hit Dynamesh, it will preserve the polygroups, but then you'll lose the color. So again, sometimes there's a bit of a push and pull with that, I find, and I think it's because it uses the what's it called, poly paint, or the surface color information to preserve polygroups, and so it's unfortunately a choice you have to make. But in a lot of cases too, when it comes to remesh, I often will kind of forego keeping the individual polygroups of things like these patches and pockets, and focus more on the overall polygrouping of putting splits in polygroups where the joints are, the knees, the fingers, the shoulders, the elbows, the wrists, right? Finger joints. So in this case, I will undo, go back. I can leave poly paint on, and then I'll simply hit Dynamesh. Okay. Again, it may come out a little bit blockier because sometimes this does go from maybe more organized mesh potentially to less. So sometimes I will up the resolution in that case to try to preserve texture quality if I don't feel like repainting or having a mess with some of that jaggedness. So I'll up the resolution and hit Dynamesh. Okay, so it's at 4 million and it came out much, much cleaner, okay? Okay, so this one, again, I'm preserving it to have a single solid shell for projecting or transferring all that detail from this version of the mesh to the clean remeshed version. And just to show you what's kind of nice about this is that if I sculpt, let's say, across, right, it's just one solid surface. It's one shell. There's no gaps between pockets and patches and layers of costuming or whatever. And same thing if I decided to paint. So let me just grab a paintbrush. All right. If I paint across here, you see the paint just goes right across. Any of those what were separate subtools are now one shell, one surface. Okay. So next, I'm going to duplicate again. And this time, this is kind of my intermediate step to basically, I basically need to get this thing below 50,000 polys roughly, okay? So I'll Dynamesh again, and I'll drop the resolution pretty low. So it's kind of weird. If you drop the resolution, but you haven't sculpted or smoothed the mesh, and you try to Dynamesh, if I control, click, and drag, it'll sort of just do nothing, which again is a bit of a pain in the butt. It's a bit of a weird gap in the software where you basically have to hold, I usually just shift and click a little bit, and then when I control, click, and drag with Dynamesh on, you'll see it drop the poly count quite a bit. So it's at 143,000, okay? So I went from 4 million back down to 143,000. The reason I do this is that when you hit Zremesh, if you hit Zremesh on a model that's 1, 2, 3, 4 plus million polys, it can crash. It can lag for a long time, so it's just a way to prevent that issue from happening. But like I said, I'm now about 3 times the poly count that I'm targeting. I'm going to turn off Dynamesh, and now I'm going to start splitting this thing into polygroups. Like I said, focused on joints. So I'll go to slice. Usually I'll turn off perspective, and I'll slice at the knees. Typically, I want to create what's called a tighty-whitey effect where I basically kind of cut through. But in this case, it doesn't flow with the costuming, so I will have to basically put a polygroup split where the shirt meets the pants, okay? And I will have to kind of go in with more of a shallow angle across here. If, by the way, your character has asymmetrical clothing, like there's bagginess on one side that's different from the other, that's fine. You can still create symmetrical topology. Create a clean symmetrical topology for the base mesh, and then project the asymmetries that you already have onto that mesh afterwards. And I'll show you what that sort of looks like. And also, if you have costume elements that are asymmetrical, those can still just be Z-remeshed or retopologized asymmetrically as well. That's totally fine. So for this, I basically kind of created a polygroup. So let me just isolate this. So a lot of times too, I'll use flat color with colorize turned off or skin shade 4. Let's do that and set the color to white. And then I'll basically just control, click, and drag to paint the mask in. Again, I'm not worried about the one side. So if you're facing the model from the front view, you can pretty much focus on one side, and then we'll flip it over to the other when we do a mirror and weld. And if you are maintaining asymmetry, it's just a little bit more work in terms of painting or masking certain sections. But most of this will go pretty fast. So just another reminder, if you mask, control, click, and drag, and paint in your masking, once you've masked something, you hit Control W, or if you're doing it based on visibility, it's just a matter of essentially making what you want polygrouped visible. There, let's clean that up. I'll go to flat. Flat usually helps me see pretty clearly if there's masking that's spilled anywhere else, and in this case, it's pretty good. So I hit Control W, and then we see that's now polygrouped, right? Okay, so again, I'll do a quick mirror and weld while I'm working on this. I'll go to Mesh Editing, Mirror and Weld, right? So we've got that, symmetry. And again, most of the time I'm basically just slicing. So for the shoulders, I do generally want something that sort of would angle through the armpit pretty centrally and then kind of come out through the top middle of the shoulders. Okay, so there's that. For the elbow, by the way, if you're coming across on a diagonal, I don't know why it is, but sometimes if you go too far, it'll slice through. Sometimes it won't. So if you find you get a slice kind of coming through this direction that you don't want, just mask the area before you do a slice. Okay, so then it won't accidentally slice into other parts of the body. Again, sometimes I'll focus on major costume elements like this kind of big cuff at the bottom, just to kind of maintain the shape there, and having an extra polygroup for something like that can help. In this case, the shoulder pads are not kind of super thick. It's a very sort of shallow element, so I'm not focused on, maybe slicing around the shoulder pads or masking and making a polygroup out of that, okay? So that, for me, can become more of a textural element, something that gets baked out through normal maps and color texture, right? Down the road with Substance Painter or even just baking directly in ZBrush. And then for the torso, yeah, if you wanted to, sometimes I will. Oops. Yeah, just do maybe, again, 3 big slices is fine, or you can go to 5. In this case, because it's not a sushi rig, I don't have to make sure that every single slice corresponds with where a joint or a bone is. I'm more focused on how the topology is going to flow, and there's going to be a lot more topology than compared to the other method or technique. And then I do want to make sure if my pants are overlapping or going to directly potentially connect to a shoe, a boot, then I may want to slice and create a polygroup here, just because when I remesh, this will potentially just be directly connected to a shoe or a boot. Okay, so next up, that's all prepped. I'm basically going to hit keep polygroups, basically hit half for the topology and hit Zremesh. And if you have symmetry on your brush, when you hit Zremesh, it will symmetrize. Yeah, and I didn't here. And you see I have a slice, right? An ugly slice. So it didn't symmetrize to the other side. But if I hit X and now I'm in symmetry, it's also kind of an alternate way to basically do something like a mirror and weld. One other thing I forgot is that there's a shirt opening here at the top. So I think I want to make sure this is also just very quickly polygrouped. So again, I can either use the slice brush or something like the mask pen. Okay. Now, if I Zremesh in half, it will roughly give me a poly count. So I'm at about 70,000. It'll give me a poly count of about 35,000, which is probably pretty good. I usually turn off adapt as well, because adapt will increase the poly count to preserve details at the sacrifice of the actual poly count you're trying to get towards. So sometimes it's kind of counterproductive, but I'll just, yeah, I'll turn it off and try now. Half. Right, I'm at about 31,000, and that's actually not terrible. I'm going to undo, because again, I do want the cuffs in here to have their own sort of polygroup. So I'll step back and maybe just mask this quickly to kind of create that opening for the hand or the wrist later on. Because again, I'm trying to think about how this might connect to my other mesh. Zremesh, and then you'll see it'll get a much kind of smoother, cleaner, circular opening there, okay? And this is pretty good overall, right? The topology's flowing. Sometimes I get some weirdness in these areas. So if you do get kind of maybe some awkward loops, I generally like the loops to still be circular in these areas. So the idea is that we have essentially something more grid-like down here. So sometimes you can use this extra brush, which is called the Zremesh guide. And if I, again, I'll undo back to 67,000. And I'll, even from the torso here, I'll left click and drag down to the front of the knee. And if you want to create a loop, you can also left click and drag from on the model to off. And if you hold shift, sorry, let's try it. It'll create a loop. So again, you're sort of saying, hey, this is sort of the structure I want you to follow when I hit Zremesh, okay? So when I hit Zremesh, you'll see actually the topology will much better align with those guides, right? So that can be useful. And sometimes, you know, I'm not always crazy about the results, so I'll just Zremesh. If I don't like it, sometimes I'll just say, okay, let's keep the same poly count and just try one more time. The other factor I'll mention too is this thing called smooth groups. It does start to kind of wash out the shape. So if we're looking at just silhouette here, let's go back. If I go back a few steps, it may shrink or soften the forms a bit too much. So if you find that happening, you can dial down or just simply slide smooth groups to 0. Which I might do at this phase just to keep the underlying kind of wrinkles and folds and stuff, but to sort of help along the topology bit. And you can do it a few times with 0 smoothing, a little bit of smoothing, and try to balance. But we will recapture the overall shape anyways. Yeah, let me just put one guide down and try it one last time here. Yeah, I think that's a little bit better. Okay. I'm okay with that for now. The main thing is that we have basically good circular loops around the knees, around the hips, slash glutes, around the shoulders, elbows, any joint that's going to bend and flex, okay? So that's it. That is kind of the bulk of the body done. So yeah, when you have more complex layers of clothing, you may often ask, do you sort of keep a jacket that's sitting on top of a shirt that then is sitting, on a body? A lot of times I would say if you don't want to complicate your life with extra animation and have like the bottom sections of jackets or a bunch of tassels, animating around, then you can try to fuse them down or simplify them down as either kind of textures down the road, or that the jacket just kind of moves with the body, right? Or extra layers of clothing just become one bigger shell. But we still see, oh, there's a jacket, the jacket's open, there's a shirt, then there's like a midriff or a belly that's exposed, right? So you have to decide, if you're willing to have a second layer of clothing that isn't part of a bigger shell. And then how much are you going to animate that? And what type of animation will you use? Will you use blend shapes? Will you use bones? Will you maybe attempt some cloth sim or something along those lines? So just think about how you want to manage your production. And if animation isn't your focus, then maybe it's more important to have either some tweaks to the design so things are more streamlined into a single big shell than having a big shell plus a jacket plus a scarf plus a this.